The forgotten gamble that changed everything. It started as a decision so small, so unremarkable, that almost no one inside the company remembered it years later. A side project, a quiet experiment, a gamble taken not with confidence, but with the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, it would lead to something useful someday. No one imagined it would become the turning point of their entire future. In business, the biggest shifts rarely begin with bold announcements. They begin in the margins, hidden inside choices made without fanfare, shaped by curiosity rather than strategy. And this gamble, overlooked and nearly abandoned, contained a spark that would eventually reignite a company drifting towards stagnation. To understand how this forgotten decision gained power, we must return to a time when the company itself felt directionless. Their flagship products were aging. Their competitors outpaced them in innovation. Their customers were slowly moving on, seeking experiences that felt more intuitive, more modern, more aligned with the world's accelerating rhythm. Inside the boardrooms, conversations grew tense. Predictions darkened. The company wasn't dying, but it was fading. And in that quiet decline, the forgotten gamble sat untouched. It was never meant to lead anything. It was an experiment created by a small team working outside the spotlight. They weren't told to build something transformative. They weren't even expecting it themselves. They were simply exploring a problem no one else had time to consider. An inconvenience so subtle the industry barely acknowledged it. For months, the project gathered dust. The team shifted to more urgent demands. Leadership barely noticed it existed. Yet even in dormancy, it held something rare. Potential aligned with a need the market had not yet voiced fully, but was already beginning to feel. This is where the reveal begins. Because while the company struggled to preserve its place in a rapidly changing landscape, the world around them evolved in a direction none of their main products could follow. But the forgotten gamble? It was built for that direction without anyone realizing it. And soon, a moment would arrive that forced the company to look again, this time with the clarity that only desperation can bring. The forgotten gamble returned to the spotlight in the most unexpected way. As the company's core products continued to decline, a sudden shift in customer behavior appeared in the data, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Users were abandoning old workflows in favor of faster, more flexible alternatives. Competitors adapted quickly. The company did not. And inside leadership meetings, urgency tightened like a closing fist. The reveal deepened. Analysts warned that their current model had less than 2 years of relevance left. Teams scrambled to launch updates, but the fixes felt shallow, disconnected from the real needs of a market evolving faster than their roadmap. The company wasn't just losing ground, it was losing identity. Then someone remembered the old experiment. Buried in archives, half built, half forgotten, the gamble resurfaced more as a question than a solution. Could this be the missing piece? When the team reopened the files, they found something remarkable. The project wasn't polished, but its foundation aligned perfectly with the direction the market had shifted toward. Concepts that once felt experimental now seemed necessary. And buried in the prototype was an insight none of their flagship products possessed, a frictionless path that matched exactly what customers were demanding. Excitement sparked. Engineers gathered around the old code, surprised by how forward-thinking it felt. Designers recognized patterns that resonated with feedback they'd been receiving for months. Leadership, initially skeptical, leaned in as the data connected the dots. The gamble wasn't just relevant, it was prophetic. But as the team explored deeper, they discovered the same problem that had stalled the project years earlier. The prototype relied on infrastructure their company didn't yet have. Back then, that limitation killed the project. Now, the crisis made it unavoidable. The conflict began. Resources were scarce. Teams were stretched thin. Every tool, every engineer, every decision was already tied to trying to revive the failing core products. Diverting energy into this forgotten experiment meant sacrificing precious time elsewhere, time the company wasn't sure it could afford to lose. Internal debates erupted. Some leaders argued that focusing on an unproven idea during a downturn was reckless. Others insisted it was the only path with a chance of turning things around. Meanwhile, early testing revealed sharp flaws in the prototype, gaps that would require rebuilding entire components from scratch. Momentum clashed with reality. And yet, despite every obstacle, the project held on to one undeniable advantage. It matched the world exactly as it was becoming. Customers wanted speed. They wanted simplicity. They wanted the freedom the old system could never provide. And with every test, every conversation, every metric, it became clearer that the gamble wasn't just timely. It might be the company's only path forward. But pursuing it meant confronting one final complication: a hidden dependency buried so deep in the company's architecture that fixing it would require dismantling part of their foundation. And unless they solved it, the gamble that could save them would collapse before it ever reached the market. The hidden dependency emerged like a fault line running beneath everything they had built. At first, it appeared as a minor warning during a routine stress test, a delay measured in milliseconds. But as the team pushed the prototype harder, the delay grew into a stall, and the stall into a full system freeze. Something deep inside their infrastructure was choking the new idea before it could breathe. The conflict erupted instantly. Engineers swarmed the logs searching for the cause. What they found was worse than anyone expected. The prototype relied on a core system built more than a decade earlier, a system patched and repatched so many times that no one fully understood its internal logic anymore. It wasn't just outdated, it was unpredictable. And unpredictable systems are death for innovation. Tension rippled through the company. Fixing the dependency meant digging into their oldest, most fragile architecture. Touching it was like performing surgery on a machine, held together by memories and duct tape. One wrong change could break things customers depended on daily. Leadership hesitated. Product teams worried about deadlines. And the engineers who examined the code felt the weight of every decision pressing down like a storm. But the alternative was worse. If they didn't confront the dependency, the forgotten gamble, the one promising idea aligned with the future, would remain trapped in a structure built for the past. And the company, already losing ground, could not afford another missed opportunity. The emotional pressure peaked as teams debated their next move. Some argued to isolate the prototype, building a separate system entirely. But that path required time they didn't have. Others suggested layering temporary fixes. But temporary solutions had created this problem in the first place. The only viable option was the most dangerous: dismantling the old dependency and rebuilding it from scratch. As the team prepared for the overhaul, new complications surfaced. Legacy code revealed conflicts no one had documented. Old workflows depended on behaviors the prototype could no longer support. Entire segments of their infrastructure operated like sealed boxes, reliable on the outside, chaotic within. Every discovery deepened the conflict, challenging the team's belief that reinvention was still possible. Yet in the middle of the frustration, clarity began taking shape. The flaws weren't random. They were patterns, signs of decisions made in an era when the company had different goals, different constraints, different expectations. The crisis had exposed them. The gamble illuminated them. And now, the team finally understood what needed to be rebuilt and why. But as they began planning the reconstruction, the most difficult truth emerged. Fixing the dependency would temporarily weaken the company even further. Service interruptions were possible. Performance might dip. Competitors could take advantage of any stumble. The leadership faced a defining choice: protect the present or bet everything on the future. Silence filled the room as the decision loomed, the kind of silence that marks the height of an emotional peak, where fear and possibility collide. And then, with a single statement, the path forward crystallized. The present was fading. Only the future could save them. The rebuild would begin. They began the rebuild with a mixture of fear and conviction, knowing the next steps would determine whether the forgotten gamble became a breakthrough or a final epitaph. The legacy dependency, brittle, tangled, and older than most of the team working on it, was finally lifted into the open. What they found wasn't just outdated code. It was a monument to every compromise the company had made to survive its early years. Piece by piece, the engineers dismantled it. They mapped ancient logic flows, confronted contradictions buried under a decade of quick fixes, and removed layers of complexity that no longer served a purpose. The process was painstaking. Each change risked destabilizing systems still relied on by millions. But with every fragment they removed, the system grew lighter, cleaner, more aligned with the world they needed to serve. For the first time, the forgotten gamble began to breathe. Once the foundation was rebuilt, the prototype snapped into place with unexpected elegance. Processes that previously stalled now moved with effortless clarity. Features that once felt clumsy became fluid. The product, once an abandoned idea gathering dust, had transformed into something bold, fast, and unmistakably modern. Then came the launch. It wasn't marketed as a revolution. It wasn't positioned as a savior. It simply arrived, confident, polished, and unlike anything the company had released in years. Early adopters noticed immediately the speed, the smoothness, the sense that the product understood problems they had grown used to tolerating. And with each new user, momentum built like a quiet wave rolling toward shore. The climax unfolded faster than anyone predicted. The gamble that once seemed irrelevant began outperforming the company's flagship offerings. Word spread. Reviewers praised its clarity. Analysts called it the company's most promising shift in a decade. Even competitors, sensing the change, accelerated their own transformations. Too late to slow the rising tide. Inside the company, a profound realization settled in. The forgotten experiment hadn't succeeded despite being abandoned. It had succeeded because it had been built free from the assumptions that held everything else back. It carried the insight of a different era, one that accidentally prepared them for the future they now needed to enter. And as the product scaled across the market, the company finally understood the truth the gamble had been whispering since the day it was created. Innovation doesn't always come from strategic brilliance. Sometimes it comes from curiosity, from quiet exploration, from the willingness to follow an idea even when no one else is watching. Reinvention had not come from confidence. It had come from the courage to rediscover what they once overlooked. Sometimes the smallest shift in perspective becomes the beginning of a new future.